This is a Friday, July 13th update from 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app on the tropical weather situation across the eastern Pacific and Atlantic Basin. Today we will touch more on the Atlantic, but we will do that in just a moment. We're going to first go ahead and tackle all the action that is still ongoing here across the eastern Pacific. You can see that Amelia is now weakening and it's below hurricane status. It's only a tropical storm and will soon weaken even more over the next few days as it continues to move off into this more stable air. On the flip side, Fabio is now on the verge of becoming a hurricane, and the Hurricane Center will likely upgrade the system to a Category 1 either in their 2 p.m. or 8 p.m. Pacific time advisories. Luckily, even though the storm is developing an eye and will likely go on to become a rather potent storm, it looks as though the conditions will not allow for this system to be much of a landfall threat. The North American water vapor imagery shows that we still have this potent ridge over the Four Corners region extending southwestward into the desert southwest of the United States and the Baja Peninsula of Mexico. But the reason why we are forecasting Fabio to make a more northwest track compared to Amelia and Daniel is that we do have the shortwave trough across the California coast, and that is just enough to pull this storm a little bit more toward the north. But again, the two main reasons why we're not expecting any landfall threat is because, one, the sea surface temperatures to the west of the Baja drop off rather significantly, and of course we're dealing with this dry air that you can see quite well on the water vapor as denoted by those dark black and orange colors. So there's not going to be much left of this system, and we're not expecting much in the way of moisture to make it into the western United States. As far as Atlantic activity goes, I know everyone is wondering when we're going to see another surge in tropical storm development, but it doesn't look like it's going to be within the next 5 days. Even though we're dealing with a series of tropical waves across the central Atlantic, conditions are not favorable for any of these waves to develop, and the same can be said for this very weak area of low pressure situated to the west of St. Petersburg, Florida. There are two main culprits behind the lack of development. First, we have a series of tropical upper tropospheric troughs and associated areas of low pressure between 20 and 25 degrees north latitude. And just to the south of these upper level lows, we've got a major axis of vertical wind shear in excess of 30 to 50 knots across much of the main development region. And we're still getting many surges of dry air on the eastern side of the Atlantic subtropical high. And as we look at the latest precipitable water analysis, some of that drier air is denoted by these darker blue and purple colors, and they start off to the northwest of Africa and south of the Azores Islands, and then they just get pushed into the deep tropics, which really helps to mitigate any type of tropical action. And that is why, although there is a tropical wave of a fairly high amplitude between 40 and 45 degrees west longitude, we're not expecting much in the way of development from it, and it's highly lacking in convection, as you can see on this infrared imagery. But one benefit of a series of tropical waves is that you get southerly flow on the eastern side of these waves, and it really helps to moisten up the atmosphere once again on the backside as they pass through. And sometimes you do need a series of wave axes to help moisten up the deep tropics once again, or at least it helps to counterbalance some of that dry air being filtered in from the north. So as we continue to look for signs of improving conditions for tropical development in the Atlantic Basin, we'll next turn to a graphic from the University of Albany showing some of the MJO anomalies, and positive values on this graphic does indicate that we are in a positive phase or sinking, suppressing phase of the MJO over the Atlantic Basin right now. But as we go into the second half of July, and more specifically the final week of July into the first week of August, it looks as though the MJO could once again become at least slightly more favorable, and we could at least have somewhat of an uptick in convection across the basin. Also, if we switch over to the GFS shear initialization, you will see that it does correctly have a lot of westerly flow across the main development region, extending westward into the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico with a lot of these tropical upper tropospheric upper level lows. But as we fast forward into days 7 and 8, we see a different picture here beginning to develop. We've got a lot more easterly flow near the African coastline, and we've got more upper level ridging trying to spread westward into the main development region. And you may also notice that the conditions even across the Caribbean are becoming more favorable, with little to no wind shear to the south of Puerto Rico as a result of the trough axis lifting more toward the north. So there are at least some minor indications that upper level winds could become a little bit more conducive for hurricane activity toward the very end of July. Despite this, as mentioned before, it still looks as though there's going to be at least another 5 to 7 days without any tropical action, and as we switch over to the GFS 850 millibar forecast, we do begin to see a more potent tropical wave possibly exiting the coast of Africa within the next 4 to 6 days, but after that it's still not showing much in the way of any tropical development. The same can be said with the latest run from the CMC model. It's not showing any organization into a tropical cyclone within the next 144 hours, but by day 6 we've got our first tropical wave in a while that we can track all the way from day 1 through day 6, and by the day 6 forecast time we've got this vorticity max pushing through the Lesser Antilles. And finally, we will leave off with the next 10-day forecast from the ECMWF run. We're looking at 850 millibar vorticity, and there's not much out there throughout the next 4 to 5 days. But as we go into day 6 and day 7, we see another slight hint of an 850 millibar vorticity max to the south of Puerto Rico. So some of the dynamical models may be at least latching on to the idea of a stronger wave trying to come through. And finally by day 10, so take this with a grain of salt because this is a very extended range forecast, but you can still at least make out a tropical wave axis moving into the southeast Gulf of Mexico, and still nothing else overly impressive across the basin, but just keep in mind that toward the end of the month we could at least start to be looking at more signs of tropical development. So that is your tropics update for this Friday afternoon. Again, just to reiterate, nothing imminent is in the Atlantic Basin, but we are ready to track anything that comes our way as we head into late July and early August. So thanks again for tuning in to 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app. Be sure to check us out, especially when the tropics become more active.